Can working on Shakespeare help you book more acting gigs? Now, of course, you know what I'm going to say. Of course, I'm going to be like, yes, yes, absolutely, it can. And yeah, spoiler alert, yes, it can. And I want to talk about why, for Shakespeare's birthday, I want to talk about the gifts of Shakespeare, the gifts that he is giving us. Oh my goodness. And now it's telling me that I'm getting some comments, but I can't see them right this second. So I'll just keep checking in and see how we're going. But please feel free to let me know where you're at. Tell me where you're based. Tell me, are you working on Shakespeare regularly? So even for those that are watching this in the future, let me know, are you working on Shakespeare regularly? Do you find that it helps your practice? I'm going to share the three big ones. Now, of course there are more, but I want to share the three big gifts that I think Shakespeare gives us. So I'm going to kick off with talking about versatility. I think one of the biggest myths that happens with Shakespeare is that people think it's kind of its own thing. It's just one thing, and that working on Shakespeare is only going to be useful for you working on Shakespeare. Now, I want to bust that myth today, and I'm going to break down why that's not the case, why working on Shakespeare can help you book all sorts of things, because including contemporary stuff, including screen work, because of how varied Shakespeare actually is. So let's talk about what Shakespeare actually is. Let's be real about this. So Shakespeare, even in the content itself, if you think about the difference in his style of writing across his many plays, the content of his writing, we've got Othello versus Midsummer Night's Dream versus, his history plays and the romances. They're really, really varied. So if you're actually working on Shakespeare, you're already working on like multiple genres, basically. You're already working that muscle. There's not like one way to do Shakespeare. You actually have to work out lots of different parts of it. Plus, there's this shift that's happened in, I think, in the material that we consume. So in the art that we're consuming, performing arts, theatre, and particularly in screen, there's been this shift in the last, I reckon, maybe 10 to 20 years that actually is really helpful for us. So I want to break down what that is. If you think back to, let's say, like the late 90s or the early 2000s, if you were around back then, if you think about movies back then, it was very contained within genres, right? Everything was kind of, you can kind of put it in a little pigeonhole, right? You'd be like, this is a horror movie, this is an action movie, and it would all kind of like tick the boxes. It followed the formula for those kinds of genres. It was very genre based. Whereas now, if you think about the kind of material that we're watching, I think viewers are a lot more sophisticated, and because of that, and writing I think is more sophisticated, particularly for screenwriting, we are seeing this kind of blend of genres across most of what we watch, right? So if you think about any show that you've watched recently, to me, there's always going to be this blend of genres. It's not like one thing. Even like, I'm thinking about the Barbie movie, something that I watched recently, where I'm thinking, okay, this is something that is very heightened, right? It's really out there, and we're going to talk about heightened in a minute. What does that mean and how is it important for us? It's really out there. It's kind of big, right? Big and camp. But then it also has moments, it has times in it where it becomes very grounded. And you see that literally play out in the storyline of it being kind of a fake world and then coming into the real world. That's an excellent example of what we're navigating when it comes to Shakespeare. So let's talk about, what does heightened mean and why is it important? So Shakespeare is a heightened text, and that's why it teaches us to do this kind of navigation. Heightened means that it's any kind of performance that contains elements beyond the everyday. With Shakespeare, we're talking about the poetry, right? It's very, very, it's got this beautiful poetic language, right, that we have to navigate, that elevates it beyond just kind of like, kitchen sink, living room drama, that sort of thing. That, having to navigate that, it requires a little more energy. It requires different skills, a different performance style or styles. And because we have to know how to do that, but we also have to know how to ground it, right? One other big problem or a myth that I see a lot with Shakespeare is that people think that with Shakespeare, it's supposed to just be over the top. That is not correct, right? There will be a lot of variety between watching something like Shakespeare in the Park, which is really, really big, massive, right? Where you're going to have a lot of energy and it might look a little more over the top, versus, say, Shakespeare on film or Shakespeare in a very intimate theatre, or adapted Shakespeare where it's kind of moving between maybe modern language, for example. There's a lot of variety there that we're having to navigate. But in any of those situations, it's not our job, it's not our goal to be like, tra la 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 la, I'm so over the top, I have poetry. Our goal is always to bring it down and make it feel as realistic, or let's say grounded, let's use the word grounded, as possible, despite the fact that there's something that's kind of bringing us up out of the everyday. And that could be the poetry, but it also could be some of the kind of extreme circumstances that often pop up in Shakespeare. Now, what I want to point out is that is happening all over the place, particularly in screen work these days. And that's what I'm talking about with Barbie, right? That there is these elements in a lot of the kind of work that we're doing, or that you might be asked to audition for, where you're asked to go big, but also make it really grounded. And Margot Robbie, I think, did a beautiful job of that, right? Where she was navigating that, I'm heightened and now I'm not, right? Or even when I'm heightened, I'm still invested in that character. I want to give you some more examples of this because it happens all the time. So if you're kind of still with me and going like, oh, but I don't think that applies to the sort of work that I want to do, I think you can kind of separate most screen work these days. You can kind of put it into the two buckets. There is a bucket of stuff that is just grounded everyday stuff. And I would put, let's say I've been watching The Bear. To me, I put that in that bucket where it's really like fly on the wall. It's almost mumblecore where they're just kind of like blah, blah, blah. It feels so everyday and it's very, very subtle. And that is gorgeous. And that goes in one bucket. Then there's this other bucket of heightened stuff, and sometimes that heightened stuff the bucket has a hole in it where it's leaking and it's going into the grounded stuff as well. So, but what we want to think about is what goes in that heightened bucket. Marvel movies go in the heightened bucket. I mean, there are aliens attacking. That is heightened. Anything fantasy is heightened, right, my friends? So that is why there are so many Marvel actors that have a background in Shakespeare. Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Hiddleston, actually, what's her name? Elizabeth, I was gonna say Mary Elizabeth. Elizabeth Olsen. There are heaps of those actors have a background in Shakespeare. It makes them very, very good at working on that kind of out there material, but making it real. Some of my favorite comedies are heightened as well. So, I mean, pop in the comments as well. Do you have a favorite series that you believe is heightened? And let's talk about it. And I'm just going to check as well. I'm having trouble seeing. It's telling me I've got, what is this doing? It's telling me I'm getting comments, but I can't see them. So let me just see what's going on. So just go ahead if you, well, hopefully I'll be able to see them. Drop me your comments. If you've got a favorite series and you're like, I don't know if this is heightened or not, let's talk about it. So my favorite comedy series, so Schitt's Creek. If I think about Dan Levy's face where he's like, that is heightened. That's so heightened. 30 Rock, Girls 5 Ever, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt is so out there. These are the things I'm talking about. And Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is a great example, I think, of something that's heightened and it's got holes in it. The bucket with holes in it. Ted Lasso goes in there because it at times is quite out there. Like the episode, I mean, if you guys have, I'm such a fan of all these shows, right? Coach Beard episode, that's like this Odyssey, Coach Beard's Odyssey. That's really weird and out there. It was almost surreal. But it also has these beautiful moments of being so, so real. That is our job now as actors. We are not expected to do one thing. We are expected to do many things. We need to be able to navigate tone. So this kind of thing that I'm talking about where we're deciding like, well, what's the feel? What's the vibe? What's the energy of a show or a material? That in screen work, we refer to that as tone usually. And in theatre, it's referred to as style usually, right? So these are some terms that can be really helpful. And actors that understand how to navigate tone or style get booked. right? So if you understand, I can look at this script and I get just from reading it, this is the vibe, right? Or I know that director, or I know this previous work. And that's part of our job too, right? Is to understand the industry. Shakespeare is part of that. So for me, and I want to give you, with all of this stuff I'm talking about today, I want to give you some really practical advice and, well, tips, things that you can do to help you make sure that you're actually working on these things. So let me know where you're at with your practice. You know, do you feel like you know how to do this stuff easily? Are you doing it already? And how can we get better at this? So drop me comments. Even if you're watching this in the future, I will get back to you. Okay, so our job is to be able to pick up that script and go, okay, I know how to change my energy and my performance based on the material I'm seeing on this page and what I know about this director or this show, etc. So in order to practice that with Shakespeare, I refer to this as scaling performance. And the reason I call it scaling is because I like to think of it basically as energy. We're adapting our energy to different types of performance, to different tone, to different style. If you think about something like, I think of like sitcoms, for example, to me are very, very heightened. They don't really feel like everyday life. They feel quite big. And I'm thinking about like classic sitcoms, even stuff like Mom. I actually love Mom, Big Bang Theory, those kinds of shows where it's like, it feels very like, here I am, I'm arriving back home. That is heightened. And instead of thinking about it as over the top, what can be useful is to think about it as having more energy. Now, it's telling me that I'm getting comments and I cannot see them, so I will do my best to try and spot them for you. Let me just see. Streaming interrupted. Oh, okay. Can you still hear me? I'm going to keep going, but let me keep going. And hello. I can see you now. Sorry. You're new to work. Oh, fabulous. Happy to be here. Fabulous. Okay, well, let me know how you are going with all this stuff. I'm going to keep going. Let me know if you are getting interruptions, but hopefully it's still working okay. Okay, so scaling, right. So it can be really helpful to think about just purely your energy. How much energy do I need to bring to this, and how much of it is visible? And this is something that I talk about a lot, and I'm very excited to announce, hooray, hooray, Shakespeare's birthday, that I now have my Essentials Hub, which has got all my core teachings, and this is one of them where I have exercises for this as well. Scaling your energy up and down, and how to understand, well, what is my energy supposed to be doing? It can be as simple as that. I think we overcomplicate it and kind of go like, oh, you know, I need to, we overthink the character thoughts and the vibe, the way we're moving. Actually, it's purely about how much energy am I generating and how much energy am I actually showing them, how much is visible. So we can talk more about that, but I would say if you're someone that's a little more experienced with Shakespeare, for example, or with acting generally, this is something that I think is an area that you can usually develop. This is what I see with most kind of intermediate to advanced actors, is that they only really know how to perform one way. They're a bit of a one-trick pony, which is not a bad thing, but if you really at that stage where you want to book more gigs, being more adaptable is a useful thing. So this is the kind of thing that I think you should be working on, which is scaling your performance. So in order to practice that, what I want you to do is just really, if you're working on some material, let's say some audition material like a monologue, or maybe you're working on a scene for a scene class, practice scaling that. And the easiest way to do that is to actually just think about different venues that you might be in. So imagine that you've been asked to do this scene in a massive outdoor theater. How would you have to adapt in order to make that work? Then imagine that you're doing it in camera in close-up, on screen in close-up. So imagine that, and you can even practice this with like, get your phone out and have it like right next to your face. That's scaling it down on the other end. So those are the extremes, right? But you can go anywhere in between. You can even practice like, there's an improv game called Genre Roller Coaster, where you can be like, now practice it, do it like you're in a Western, do it like you're in a camp comedy. Doing that kind of stuff, it really helps push you into areas where you may not be comfortable. And a lot of people have been spending so much time trying to make sure that their performance is so grounded, because we're so used to being on self-tapes, or we're so focused on screen work, that we actually don't know how to adapt when we're given something like sitcom material, and it's not supposed to be like that. Another area that this is really useful is retail voiceover, right? It actually pops up a lot. So I talked about fantasy, sci-fi, horror, all of those can be really heightened. Period drama, any sort of period drama, not just talking about Shakespeare, but like Bridgerton, right? All of that stuff requires you to be able to do something a little bit outside of the norm, outside of the everyday, and make it sound real. Like I love watching shows and checking out like their dialogue and thinking about how do you make that grounded? Some of the stuff that they say is insane. Some of the scripts, like just watching like The Mandalorian. Oh, that's right. You having any problems? Great. I'm just reading your comments. That's okay. No problems. So watch stuff like Bridgerton, The Mandalorian, and even like I had a line, I think, from Secret Invasion, which I don't think was like an amazing show, but it's a good example. And it was something like, and I was like, oh, there's antithesis. Shakespeare has that. And it pops up all the time, right? To know how to navigate those things is so, so powerful. Okay. So let me know if you have any comments about that, about scaling. And I always love to check in. This is a really good thing to ask yourself. Do you think you have a tendency to go small or go big? Everyone will have a default where you're a little bit on the small side or a bit on the big kid side. Big kids are, when we go big, I often think of it as like theater kid energy. So if you have theater kid energy, just drop it in the comments. I got theater kid energy. I am a theater kid energy, which is like, I will have a tendency to go a bit big, and I have to be like, I have to practice doing it really, really contained, right? That's my journey. And if you're someone that's spent a lot of time in screen work, for example, or that's been your focus, or you have a real fear of going a bit bigger, you're going to be on that smaller side, and it will really benefit you to practice going bigger. It will actually, you will discover that when you learn to go bigger, it does make you more versatile. So that's our number one gift from Shakespeare, is actually versatility. Okay, so let me know in the comments, like what are you? Are you theatre kid energy? Are you on the big side or in the small side? Just roughly, it's good to know basically where you fall. I think if you're someone that's like, I think I'm in the middle, you're probably not in the middle, my friend. Nobody's really in the middle, because in the middle would require like perfect balance, and no one really has that, right? So think about, are you more a little bit big? Okay, so you definitely have trouble going big. Yeah, absolutely. And I hear that a lot. I actually think that's probably the biggest problem I see. If you're coming to Shakespeare and you're very new, most people don't know how to harness that energy. And that actually leads me really well into segue, gift number 2, which is connection. So let's talk about that now. I have problems going big. What do I do? Let's segue into the next one. It really helps too. So connection is, I think, one of Shakespeare's, my favorite gifts from Shakespeare is connection. This is another myth, so we do a lot of myth busting here. There's so many myths out there concerning Shakespeare and how it all works and what we're supposed to be doing here. One of the things that often kind of gets in the way is that we think that Shakespeare is all about the language. But actually Shakespeare it's a full body experience, which sounds so silly. It's one of those things where you need to have your whole body switched on. Because it is heightened, we require energy through our whole bodies, right? And this is a big area to talk about, but essentially we cannot just be focused on the language. We actually have to be focused on connecting breath and body. And that's partly because to get that heightened style going, it requires a lot of energy shooting through the body, and that energy, not shooting, like circling through the body, that energy has to be synced up with what we're saying, right? So we can't just be kind of like, we've got lots of energy and we're kind of shouting and stuff. That won't work. That will not work on our kind of heightened style. It's just going to look fake and over the top. So to get that grounded thing, we have to have everything working in unison. it also relates to iambic pentameter. Now, this is the stuff, well, people often think with the iambic pentameter, it's all about the de-dum, de-dum, de-dum. In my opinion, iambic pentameter is breath work. It is breath work. It is designed for you to understand how a phrase flows. And this is another big thing I talk about in my Essentials Hub. I'm just, shameless plug, because please take a look. Actually, I will link it for you. The Essentials Hub, which is new and very it's my 12 core lessons that I will give to you to have solid foundation in Shakespeare. This is the one of the things I talk about, is how iambic pentameter is breath work, and it's really just about understanding flow. I really think that it helps people to reframe what we're doing when we're talking about rhythms. Rhythms are about energy and flow. If you go back to music, you think about music, and I teach music as well as my background is in music, and so one of the things I was thinking about recently when I was teaching this piece, this incredible vocal piece that has all these time signature changes, and I was like, this is just exactly like Shakespeare, where the composer was messing with the rhythms, and she would change this kind of fast rhythm into a long note. That's what Shakespeare does. It's like music, and when we feel this kind of even fast notes, right, and then we got this long note here. That fast stuff is driving to the long note. This is what Shakespeare does. We get this build up. It's like a wave crashing, right? It syncs up with our heart. It syncs up with our breath. When we understand how to breathe, we understand how to act. And this brings us alive in our bodies, and it applies to every single type of acting that you do. Everything. So when you understand rhythm, flow, connection, acting becomes easier, because in my opinion, acting is really about breath, because breath is to be alive. Breath connects us to our energy. It's our energetic flow. I mean, I'm a bit of a hippie, but this, to me, it simplifies what we do here. Instead of over psychologizing this stuff, just thinking about, I just need to breathe in order to act. I am embodying a character's experience, and all I need to do is breathe. And if I breathe in the way that the character is breathing, even if I'm not thinking the way the character thinks, because a lot of people kind of approach it that way, if I breathe the way the character breathes, I will experience the same thing. I'm getting so excited about this. So sorry, I'm a bit I get a bit carried away, but let me know, does that resonate for you? Do you do a lot of kind of breath work activities? Do you feel like you could explore that for yourself? So I'm just checking in on our comments, and let me just, yeah, okay, cool. So in order to access this stuff, so, let me know what you think about that. Do you feel like you find it easy to connect to the breath? Would you know where to start with that? Do you find it easy to connect to your body? And I'm going to give you a bit of a tip. So, and of course, for those watching in the future, this is about you, and I want to support you. So do let me know where you're at in your practice, and I can suggest, do this exercise, get this going. But I want to share something that I shared with someone messaged me on Instagram, actually, and it sounds like a tangent, but it's all related. They were asking me about, well, how do I move for my monologue? I'm working on my monologue. What do I do for my movement? And I always say, because I think this is another myth with Shakespeare, we think that we're supposed to be kind of wandering around the stage. No, you need energy in your body, and that's the number one thing. So coming back to saying what you were talking about before about having trouble going big, the best thing that you can be doing to find that way of going big without being over the top is to generate energy in your body by moving your body when you speak. So at the same time, right? So most of us, when we're practicing our acting, right, we're usually standing on the spot, blah, 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 blah. Our energy drops. The best thing that you can do, especially if you want to practice going bigger, is to move your body. And it doesn't even have to be, and in fact, I would suggest don't make it naturalistic. It does not have to make sense. So for me, the first thing I do is I jog around the room, or I go to the park and I literally run my lines. So run your lines, run around, and I'm going blah, 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 like usually when I'm kind of getting off book, I'm jogging around, and it teaches you how to get that energy in your body. And a lot of the time you will actually sync up your breath with the lines naturally when you're moving, because your breath will understand, it will intuitively kick in and be like, well, this is the end of a sentence, or it's the end of a line, whatever. My breath kicks in because I need it, and I'm forcing myself to move, so my breath has to be instinctive. So number one is running. The second thing you can do is dance around the room. So do your lines and just do a boogie. The wonderful thing about these things, I'll tell you a couple more things. Shaking, jumping, that you can pretty much do anything with your body. So just keep your body moving while you speak. Ideally, if you can, make a bit of noise, use volume when you're speaking. This is going to get you used to bringing that energy up. It's just such a simple thing, and we really we're often overthinking these things. Like, what do I need to do? Run around, my friends. And so this person that was asking me on Instagram about this, and I said, go and run around, and she came back to me and said, it was amazing. And then during the audition, I cried, all the emotions were just flowing easily, because I'd been practicing running around while, and moving my body while I'd been practicing my monologue. So that's your number one, and that's what's going to get that connection between breath and body. So stop rehearsing things standing still. Okay, so that's my little tip for you. So I'm just checking our comments again, because for some weird reason can't see them on my first screen here. So I'll go on to tip number 3 while I'm just checking your comments as well. It's not showing me I don't know. That's okay. Facebook, so much fun. Love it. Okay, so let's go on to number 3. What's our third gift from Shakespeare? It's detail. So Shakespeare, as we know, has a lot going on. I think it's really useful to just acknowledge that working on Shakespeare takes time. This is another thing that I think a lot of people have problems with, especially if they're new. I've seen people go, I'm trying out for drama school in a week, and I've just chosen this monologue, or I'm auditioning and I've never read this play before, but here I am. It takes time, so don't underestimate the amount of time that you will need to give to the analysis process. So really what I'm talking about here when I talk about detail is script analysis. I would say most actors are pretty poor at script analysis. And I'm not saying that to be rude. I actually just think that we're often not taught how to do script analysis in a useful way. I think there's a lot of people coming to acting, and it's so much about, it's my character's backstory, but people are not actually looking at what's there. They're creating all this stuff without actually even looking at the material itself. And Shakespeare has this funny thing where the characters almost don't exist off the page, in a sense that there's not a lot of backstory stuff. They really exist in a bubble, and it can be really helpful to remember that you don't usually need a lot of backstory, maybe like a handful of stuff to make sure that you understand relationships. That can be helpful, but you do not need to be creating lots of backstory. What you need to do is understand what's there. And John Barton, who's the kind of grandfather of verse speaking and acting Shakespeare, talks about the language is character. Character is language. It's the same thing. So in order to really become good at Shakespeare, you just need to understand that we have pretty much everything we need on the page there. So to really make the most of this gift, what I recommend is that you need to look at your analysis process, or at least create an analysis process. What are the things that you actually do? So pop this in the comments as well. What do you tend to do when you pick up a script and you are having a look at the script and you're at that first stage? So for me, I always talk about the stages being analysis, this first stage, and perhaps research if you need it, but usually just analysis. embodiment, and then freedom. They're the kind of stages. And the embodiment is where we're looking at that connection stuff, which we talked about before. So we're kind of going backwards here. Your analysis stage, the stuff on the page. What are you doing? You know, so drop me a comment. What do you tend to do? Because I would say most people are kind of, there's so much psychology and not really enough of looking at what's there. So with Shakespeare, one of the things that I would say immediately, a lot of people go immediately to rhythms, which if you know how to do that, sorry if there's an airplane passing overhead, hopefully that's not too noisy. If you know how to look at rhythms, if you know how to do a scansion process, great. If you don't, I really don't panic about that sort of thing, because a lot of people go, oh, I need to look at the iambic pentameter and the scansion and I don't know what that is. Don't worry right now. If you're new, I guarantee you there is like 8,000 other things you could be doing before you even get to that point. Looking at, so for me particularly, you must translate. You must paraphrase it into your own words. You must. Absolutely. Does not matter how experienced you are. Please translate it into your own words. You need to look, thought changes are useful. So what's going on in between? So this is something that's probably worth talking about in terms of lots of people love inner monologue for a character. And that was one of the things I used to gravitate towards the most when I was doing contemporary work. I used to always put inner monologue in between all the lines, like what's going on for the character in between those moments. That used to really help me kind of create a through line and help me think in character. That is useful for Shakespeare too. And I would say mostly what I recommend with that is keeping it to a minimum, pop it in between the big beats. So that's another really big important part of your analysis, is where are those gear changes? Shakespeare's characters, they have big leaps in thought. I think this is a major difference between contemporary and classical, where with contemporary we're often kind of trucking along on a reasonably obvious train of thought, right? That you can see them kind of going, oh, I'm thinking about this thing, and then I think about this. It's usually reasonably clear. Whereas with Shakespeare's characters, they're often going like boom, 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 like they have these massive gear changes. And that is so useful for you to understand, because when you understand those gear changes, you can play those big discoveries. So this in itself is a massive skill up level. I would say that this is the biggest thing I've been saying to students trying out for drama school this past year, when I've been gravitating towards like one particular thing, which is let us see you think. And this applies to contemporary and classical. Most actors are just talking, and there's actually really not much going on in between the lines, and there's also not much going on even on the line. You need to understand, when do I need to show a thought process in between a line, and when do I need to play thought process on a line? So that's another element. And again, shameless plug, I talk about this in my Essentials Hub, because I'm excited about this, because this is the stuff, I created this very structured sequence of lessons because these are really the essentials, and that's why I call it my Essentials Hub. This is the stuff that you need to know in order to really have a solid foundation in Shakespeare, and then take it beyond that. And just talking about that acting on the line thing, this difference between acting on the line and acting between the lines. I heard an actor say recently, so she was talking about screen work, and she was talking about how when she does, I think she was talking about guest star roles, so when she's playing not a main role in screen work, that she was also seeing, she realized that she needed to act on the line more often, because in the edit, they would cut away from her reaction. So she couldn't deliver the line and then react afterwards, because they would not see that. And that is, I've actually heard this from a couple of actors as well. This was their learning process, playing smaller roles on screen. You need to know how to act on the line as well as in between the lines. And that is required, that's a big thing with Shakespeare. So with Shakespeare, we talk about acting on the line. That's about having that realization while you speak, moving while you speak, having everything synced up, that connection that I was talking about before, that is part of the style. When you understand that that's part of our style, and then we also have to navigate those big moments in between, we become pros at that acting on the line or between lines, and you get to choose, right? And then when you come to contemporary work, you pick up the script and go, great, here I can act on the line, here I can act in between the lines. Given your stuff all the time, thank you, says the camera, right? So there's so much stuff that we can implement, that this is technical. So this is overall, just to kind of, bring us to a delightful close. This is what I love about Shakespeare, is that it is highly technical. And when we work on these technique things, we are so adaptable. We're the kind of actors that people want to cast, because we can be directed, right? You need to do this, can you act that on the line here? Yes, I can, right? I get it. I've chosen this. And we're very thoughtful, right? So let me know, how are you guys going with your practice? Oops, hang on, sorry. I nearly reloaded this page. Oops, I was trying to check out your comments. Let me know, how are you going with this practice? Do you feel like you've implemented all of those things? Do you feel like you have somewhere to go? Has that given you some tools? So let me know where you're at, and I'll just quickly check the comments, but I think I'll also sign off in a sec. And you just let me know, even if you're watching this in the future, just drop me your comments, so I can help you out with that next step. And of course, I will, shameless plug, link the Essentials Hub info below as well, because it's really handy if you're wanting to get started and really work on things and not just be jumping around and reading random books. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me, those that are here with me live. Thanks, guys. It's so lovely to chat with you all. Keep in touch. Let me know how you're going with your practice. Let me know if you have questions, and I will see you very soon. I'll do another live soon. All right. Bye, everyone.